They called it Harborview Lake. That name appeared on the development's marketing brochure, the HOA newsletter, the entrance sign, the dock boxes on every slip of the 40-slip Marina. It did not appear anywhere in the county's deed records, the State Water Rights Registry, or the permit files of the State Water Authority. In every document that carried legal weight, the 1976 Water Court Decree, the 1983 Impoundment Permit, the 1984 Boundary Survey, it had one name: Crane Reservoir, private property, my family's, adjudicated and recorded since 1952. I built the dam myself, designed the inlet system, filed the hydraulic analysis. The eastern inlet valve had one function: divert the northern stream away from the reservoir and into my hayfields. I had never needed to use it at full diversion in 43 years. Monday morning at 9:20, I turned the valve. 72 hours later, a resident walked to the marina, looked out from the pavilion deck, and posted 3 words to the neighborhood forum. Where is the water? The water was in my hayfields, where the 1976 decree said it could be. It had always been mine to move. Before we jump into today's story, drop where you're watching from in the comments, smash that like button, and make sure you're subscribed for more crazy stories like this. The Crane family had farmed the 520-acre parcel since the summer of 1952, when Emmett's father drove a survey stake into the western ridge and called it home. The land ran from the ridge's crest down through mixed timber on the upper slopes and out onto the eastern flats, where the hay grounds stretched toward the county road in long, level fields that held moisture well in wet years and cracked in dry ones. 2 streams came off the ridge, one from the north, one from the northeast, and crossed the property on their way to the lower drainage, feeding the eastern flats with the irregular generosity of unmanaged water. Too much in March, not enough in August. Reliable only in the sense that you could rely on it to disappoint you, precisely when you needed it most. Emmett's father had managed both streams through flood irrigation, diversion ditches cut by hand in the 1950s, headgates fashioned from salvaged lumber, the whole system requiring constant attention and delivering inconsistent results. It worked well enough to keep the hay operation viable, and not well enough to make it dependable. Emmett had grown up watching his father walk the ditch banks in August, checking flows that were never quite adequate, adjusting gates that never quite held, and he had understood from an early age that the problem was not the streams themselves, but the absence of storage. The water existed. There was simply nowhere to hold it between the time it arrived and the time it was needed. He left the property at 18 to study civil engineering at the State University, completed a graduate program in irrigation system design, and joined the State Irrigation District in 1965 as a junior engineer. The work was the work he had grown up watching his father struggle with, scaled to a regional level: storage systems, conveyance infrastructure, diversion structures, the whole machinery of turning irregular natural flow into reliable agricultural water. He spent 13 years in the field, reviewing site plans, calculating storage volumes, designing inlet and outlet works for reservoirs from 1 acre to several hundred. He was precise and patient, and he trusted mathematics over intuition, which in irrigation engineering meant he trusted mathematics in the way that a surgeon trusts anatomy, not as an abstraction, but as the operational reality that everything else depended on. He came back to the property in 1978, after his father's health had declined enough that the operation needed a second hand. He had been commuting on weekends for 2 years by then, and had been looking at the eastern flats and the 2 ridge streams with the eyes of an irrigation engineer for the entire time. He had done the preliminary storage calculations on his kitchen table in the district office apartment, working from his own flow measurements taken during weekend visits, and he had known for at least 4 years what the solution was and approximately what it would cost. The natural depression at the north end of the eastern flats, a broad, shallow basin where the 2 streams converged before continuing south, was a reservoir site. His father had seen a wet spot that grew reeds in spring. Emmett saw a 28-acre impoundment with 22 feet of available head and a gravity-fed distribution system to every hayfield on the property. Before he could build the reservoir, he needed to adjudicate the water. This was not a formality. In a prior appropriation state, water rights are property rights, and property rights must be established through the legal system before they can be relied upon. Emmett filed for adjudication of both streams in the spring of 1976, retained a water rights attorney for the proceeding, and spent 14 months documenting his prior use history, the flood irrigation records his father had kept since 1952, the flow measurements Emmett himself had been taking since 1975, the crop records showing continuous beneficial use. The State Water Court issued its decree in the fall of that year. Water Rights Decree WD-1976-008, vesting in Emmett James Crane the prior appropriation rights to both streams, with a priority date of 1952 based on the documented commencement of beneficial use. The decree was recorded in the State Water Rights Registry and in the county deed records. It was the strongest form of water ownership the state's legal system recognized. Under prior appropriation doctrine, Emmett's decreed rights were senior to any subsequent claim and were subject to diversion at any time for beneficial use on the Crane property, without notice to any other party. He had the water. Now he could build the storage. The reservoir construction began in the summer of 1982 and was complete by the fall of 1983. The state water permit, WR-1983-114, had been issued that spring after a review process Emmett navigated with the practiced efficiency of a man who had spent 13 years on the other side of the permit desk. He knew what the reviewers needed, and he gave it to them in the correct form and in the correct order, and the permit came back clean. 28-acre maximum surface area, 22-foot maximum depth at the dam face, 2 inlet streams as the water source under Decree WD-1976-008. A controlled outlet works on the southern end for downstream bypass flow, and an eastern inlet valve system, a manually operated diversion gate on the northern stream, that allowed Emmett to redirect that stream's full flow into the western field irrigation system rather than the reservoir, for use in direct field application when storage was not needed. The eastern inlet valve was a piece of engineering that Emmett had designed himself, because it served 2 functions simultaneously. In its normal position, open to the reservoir, it directed the northern stream's flow into the impoundment, contributing to storage. In its diverted position, redirected to the field system, it bypassed the reservoir entirely and delivered the stream's flow directly to the gravity-fed distribution network on the western flats. He had included it in the permit application as a standard irrigation system component, which it was. The State Water Authority had reviewed it and approved it without comment, which was appropriate, because an irrigation diversion gate on an adjudicated stream was one of the most routine structures in water rights law. The decree authorized the diversion. The permit authorized the valve. Both instruments had been in the county and state records since the 1970s and 1980s, respectively. He completed the boundary survey in the spring of 1984, a formal survey of the reservoir's shoreline at maximum fill elevation, conducted with his own instruments and filed with the county surveyor's office. The survey confirmed what the original parcel deed described. The reservoir, at its permitted maximum water surface elevation, sat entirely within the Crane property boundary. The shoreline at full pool was inside the deed line at every point, with a minimum setback of 35 feet on the eastern side, where the parcel boundary ran closest to the water. He filed the survey under his own surveyor's certification. He had maintained a professional surveying license as a secondary credential since 1971, and kept a certified copy in the filing cabinet in the farmhouse's second bedroom, behind the tab labeled Reservoir, Water Rights. The reservoir transformed the hay operation. Where his father had managed flood irrigation with hand-cut ditches and salvaged lumber gates, Emmett operated a gravity-fed pressurized system, drawing from 22 feet of head, delivering water to every field on the eastern flats through buried PVC laterals with aluminum risers at 200-foot intervals. The system was designed for a 40-year service life. It was now in its 43rd year and had not failed once. He serviced it himself, kept a maintenance log in the same format as the water log books, and replaced wear components on a schedule he had set in 1984 and had not needed to revise. The reservoir filled in winter and spring from the 2 ridge streams, held through the early summer, and was drawn down for field irrigation through July and August. By September, the fall rains were beginning, and the cycle started again. He had been running this cycle alone since his wife passed in 2017. Their daughter had moved east 20 years ago, and their contact was occasional and warm, but not close in the daily sense. Their granddaughter Clara was the family member who had inherited the specific kind of attention Emmett recognized as his own: the precision, the patience, the habit of reading documents before forming opinions. She had worked for the State Water Authority for 6 years before entering private practice as a water rights attorney, and she visited the property 3 or 4 times a year, always spending at least one morning in the filing cabinet room, going through whatever had accumulated since her last visit. She had read the water rights decree, the permit, and the boundary survey in their entirety at 24 years old, sitting at the same kitchen table where Emmett had done his original reservoir calculations, and had looked up afterward and said, "You built a good system." He had said he had tried to. She called on Sunday evenings, same as his daughter Ruth in the Voss story, but Clara's calls ran longer because she asked questions about the documents as often as she asked about the property. She was interested in the mechanics of the water rights, in the way that engineers are interested in the mechanics of systems, not abstractly, but practically, because the system had to work correctly under real conditions, and the documents were what defined what correctly meant. He was at the kitchen table when she called that Sunday, the late afternoon light coming through the west window at the low angle that meant the day was finishing. She asked about the hay yield, the eastern stream flow rates, the reservoir level. He answered all three. The yield had been slightly below the 10-year average. The stream flows were nominal for the season. The reservoir was at 94% of design capacity after a good spring fill. Then he mentioned, in the same even tone he used for all of it, that the HOA down the eastern slope had put in a new pavilion last summer. He had seen the construction from the ridge in July. Concrete footings along the eastern shoreline, the framing going up over 2 weeks, the finished structure visible from the ridge by August. It sat on his shoreline. He had noted it in the logbook. Clara asked who had authorized construction on his shoreline. He said no one had contacted him. She asked if anyone from the development had ever presented him with a recorded easement for the shoreline access. He said no. He said he had written to the developer in 2007 when the development was being built, and to the HOA board in 2009 when the marina was installed, stating that the reservoir was his private property and that no access right had been granted. Both times he had received a response citing something called a recreational water access corridor in the developer's marketing plan. Both times he had checked the county deed and easement records. No corridor, no easement, no instrument of any kind. He had filed the responses in the cabinet and continued monitoring. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said she would drive up Saturday. He said the guest room was ready. He went to the second bedroom after they hung up and pulled the reservoir folder from the cabinet. The water permit, the decree, the boundary survey, the 2 objection letters, the developer's marketing plan he had obtained from the county permit office in 2008. He set the folder on the kitchen table and left it there for her. He went back to the west window and looked out at the ridgeline going dark against the evening sky. Somewhere below the ridge's eastern face, in the natural depression where 2 streams converged and a 28-acre impoundment had sat since 1983, the marina floated on his water. The pavilion stood on his shoreline, and in the county's easement records, as it had always been, there was nothing. He opened his logbook and wrote the Sunday date and the lake level and the stream flow readings, and one additional line. Clara call, pavilion noted. Shoreline access, no recorded instrument. Clara arriving Saturday. Then he closed the logbook and made dinner. The letter was 10 days away. The land east of the Crane property had been agricultural ground for as long as anyone in the county could remember. 2 family operations running row crops and pasture on the lower slopes, the fields running east toward the county road in the flat, open way of land that has been worked consistently and without drama for generations. When the survey stakes appeared in the spring of 2005, Emmett saw them from the western ridge during his morning walk, and noted them in his logbook with the same 2-line entry he used for anything that touched the property's perimeter. Date, observation, no immediate action required. He had been making that kind of entry for 40 years. Most of them amounted to nothing. He recorded them anyway, because the ones that amounted to something needed to have been recorded from the beginning. The Harborview Estates development permit was filed with the county in early 2006. Emmett pulled the permit application from the county planning office the week it appeared in the public notice index. The same week, the same county office, the same procedure he used for any development application within drainage distance of his property. He was not a litigious man, and he was not a suspicious one. He was an irrigation engineer who had spent 13 years reviewing permit applications, and who understood that the time to identify a problem in a development proposal was before the concrete was poured, not after. He read the application with the specific attention of someone who knows what he is looking for. He found it on page 4 of the site plan narrative, in the section describing the development's proposed recreational amenities. The document referred to the body of water on the adjacent property, his reservoir, his 28-acre private impoundment built in 1983 and operated under State Water Permit WR-1983-114 and Water Rights Decree WD-1976-008 as Harborview Lake, a natural recreational water feature. It described a recreational water access corridor that would provide all 210 development residents with access to the lake's shoreline and water surface. And it contained, in the permit application's access rights section, a single sentence that Emmett read 3 times to confirm he had read it correctly. Existing recreational water corridor per prior agreement with adjacent landowner. He set the document down on the counter and looked at it for a moment. Then he drove home and checked the county's deed and easement records from his home office computer. The same records he had checked when the survey stakes appeared, and the same records he would check every time a relevant document arrived for the next 18 years. No easement, no recorded corridor, no instrument of any kind, granting any party any right of access to his reservoir or its shoreline. He had never been contacted by the developer. He had never signed an agreement. He had never been asked to sign one. The prior agreement cited in the permit application did not exist in any record he could find, because it did not exist at all. He wrote to the developer the following week, a straightforward letter, 3 paragraphs, certified mail. The reservoir was his private property under deed, Water Permit WR-1983-114, and Water Rights Decree WD-1976-008. No access right, easement, or recreational corridor had been granted, agreed to, or recorded. The permit application's citation of a prior agreement was false. He expected the application to be corrected before the county issued a building permit. He kept the certified mail receipt and filed the letter behind the new tab he had created in the reservoir folder. Access disputes. The developer's response came 2 weeks later on company letterhead, signed by a project manager named Trevelyan. It said the recreational water access corridor was consistent with the development's approved site plan, and that the company was coordinating with the county to formalize the access arrangement prior to the development's opening. It cited the county permit number. It did not address the false prior agreement language. It did not cite a recorded instrument, because there was no recorded instrument to cite. Emmett checked the county records again the week the response arrived. Nothing new. He filed the response behind his letter and wrote in his logbook. Developer response. Coordination claim unsupported by county record. No easement filed. Continue monitoring. The county issued the building permit in April 2006. Emmett had submitted a written objection to the permit office citing the false right-of-way language. The permit office had acknowledged it and noted it in the file and issued the permit anyway, on the basis that the access arrangement was a civil matter between private parties. Emmett noted this in his logbook, added the permit office response, and watched the construction proceed. The development opened in 2007. The 60 lakefront units sold at a premium. The marketing materials were glossy and specific. The reservoir featured on the cover of the sales brochure under the name Harborview Lake. Photographs taken from the eastern shore at sunrise, showing the water surface catching the morning light in a way that made it look like something a developer had created for the purpose, rather than something a retired civil engineer had built in 1983 to water his hayfields. The brochure described a recreational water access corridor available to all residents and depicted the proposed marina in a rendering that showed 40 slips, a boat launch ramp, and a waterfront gathering area along the eastern shoreline. Every element of the rendering was on Emmett's property, not adjacent to it, on it. The marina construction began in the spring of 2009. Emmett watched it from the western ridge with his field glasses, the pile driving for the dock system's support posts, the ramp grading, the concrete work along the shoreline. He wrote to the HOA board in July of that year, the same week the dock system was floating. The letter followed the same structure as his 2007 letter to the developer. 3 paragraphs, plain language, certified mail, no threats. The reservoir was his private property. The dock had been installed on his lake bed without his consent. No access right had been granted. He attached copies of the water permit and the water rights decree and requested written acknowledgement that no access right existed and a timeline for removal of the unauthorized structure. The HOA's response cited the recreational water access corridor from the developer's marketing plan. It said the board was operating in good faith, reliance on the representations made during the sale of the lakefront units, and that the access corridor was a documented feature of the development's approved plan. It did not attach a recorded easement. Emmett checked the county records. Still, nothing. He filed the response and wrote in his logbook, HOA response. Marketing plan cited again. County record unchanged. Position maintained. Dock remains unauthorized. He did not write to them again after 2009. The record of his objection was established. 2 certified letters, 2 responses, citing documents that were not recorded instruments, 2 post-response county record checks, confirming the absence of any easement. He had done what the law required him to do to preserve his objection. What he had not done, and what he understood he could not indefinitely defer, was act on it. The moment for action had not yet arrived. He continued monitoring. The waterfront pavilion went up in the summer of 2011, a covered structure with a timber frame and a concrete deck, positioned on the eastern shoreline within his deed boundary, visible from the ridge from the week its framing began. He noted it in his logbook. Pavilion construction, eastern shoreline, within deed boundary. No authorization requested. No authorization granted. He checked the county permit records for the pavilion's building permit. The permit listed the project address as the Harborview Estates Common Area address and described the structure's location as HOA Common Area. It did not reference the crane deed. It did not document an access right. The county had issued it without verification of the applicant's ownership interest in the shoreline, the same way it had issued the Marina dock permit 2 years earlier. Diane Hollis moved into one of the lakefront units in 2009, the year the Marina was installed, and joined the HOA board in 2013. She became board president in 2016 after running on a platform of amenity enhancement and community branding. Her background was marketing, 20 years in resort and hospitality promotion, the last 8 as a regional marketing director for a resort management company that had operated 3 lakefront properties. She understood what water access did to property values and community identity, and she had brought that understanding to the HOA board with considerable energy. Under her presidency, the development's communications had been redesigned. New newsletter format, new website, new welcome packets for incoming residents, all featuring Harborview Lake as the development's defining amenity. The name Harborview Lake appeared in every HOA document Diane produced. It appeared on the development's entrance sign. It appeared on the Marina's dock boxes. It did not appear anywhere in the county's deed or water rights records, because it was not the name of anything in the county's deed or water rights records. The reservoir's name, in every record that mattered, was Crane Reservoir. She had not looked at the deed. She had not looked at the water permit. She had not looked at the water rights decree. She had reviewed the developer's marketing plan, the HOA's founding documents, and the CC&Rs, all of which described the lake access as a community amenity, and none of which constituted a recorded property right. She knew the documents she had reviewed because she had organized them in a board reference binder when she took the presidency. She did not know the documents she had not reviewed, because the question of whether there were other relevant documents had not occurred to her. Marcus Fell had been on the board for 2 years. He was a former municipal infrastructure planner, the kind of professional who reviews permit applications for a living and knows that the difference between a marketing description and a recorded instrument is the difference between a wish and a right. He had joined the board because he was interested in the development's infrastructure maintenance planning, which was chronically underfunded, and he had spent his first year on the board working through the reserve fund analysis. In his second year, he had begun, quietly, to look at the documents underlying the HOA's major asset claims. The lake access was the largest. The demand letter was drafted in the second week of April. Diane had circulated a draft to the board for signature, a formal letter to Emmett Crane, demanding that he dredge the eastern shallows to improve marina navigation depth, install improved lighting along the eastern shoreline per HOA specifications, and maintain a minimum water level sufficient for marina operations year-round. The letter cited the HOA's established amenity rights over Harborview Lake. It did not cite a recorded instrument. There was no recorded instrument to cite. Marcus read the draft on a Tuesday evening and wrote Diane a short email before he went to bed. He said he wanted to sign the letter but needed to resolve one question first. Could she send him the recorded easement instrument establishing the HOA's access right to the reservoir? He said he had looked in the county deed index under the Crane parcel address and had not found a recorded easement. He wanted to make sure he was looking in the correct place. He sent the email at 9:47 p.m. and saved a copy to his personal drive. Diane replied Wednesday morning. She said the access was documented in the developer's marketing plan and the HOA's founding documents, and that the recreational water access corridor was an established feature of the development. She said the county permit for the marina referenced the corridor. She said the board had been operating on this basis for 15 years. Marcus read the reply. He wrote one line in response. "Does a recorded easement exist?" He sent it and waited. Diane did not reply to the follow-up. She called Marcus on Thursday afternoon and said the letter needed to go out by end of week and that the legal basis was solid. Marcus said he needed to see the recorded instrument before he could sign. Diane said the marketing plan and the founding documents were the relevant instruments. Marcus said those were not recorded instruments in the deed record sense, and that he wanted to verify the county filing before signing anything that asserted legal rights over someone else's property. Diane said she would have the board's attorney confirm the access right by the following week. Marcus said he would sign after the confirmation. The letter went out Friday with 2 signatures, Diane's and the third board member's, a recently joined resident named Carol, who had not asked any questions about the underlying documents. Marcus's signature was absent. The letter was on HOA letterhead, 3 paragraphs, the demands stated in plain language. Dredge the eastern shallows, install shoreline lighting, maintain minimum water level for marina operations year-round. The cited basis? The HOA's established amenity rights over Harborview Lake. It arrived at Emmett's farmhouse on a Tuesday, delivered certified. He signed the receipt, carried it to the kitchen table, and read it standing. Dredging, lighting installation, guaranteed minimum water level for marina operations. He read the phrase, established amenity rights over Harborview Lake, and set the letter flat on the table. The reservoir did not have a name in any document that carried legal weight. It had a permit number and a decree number and a deed description and a boundary survey filed with the county surveyor. Those documents called it Crane Reservoir. They had called it that since 1983. He called Clara that evening. He read her the demand paragraph. She asked if they had attached a recorded easement. He said no. She said she would drive up Saturday. He said the guest room was ready. After they hung up, he went to the second bedroom and pulled the reservoir folder from the cabinet, the full file, everything from the 1976 decree forward, and set it on the kitchen table beside the letter. Then he opened his logbook and wrote the date and the demand's key terms, and one line at the bottom of the entry. No recorded instrument cited. Clara arriving Saturday. Boyd Whitaker, pending. Clara arrived Saturday at 9, 2 hours after sunrise. The drive from the state capitol completed in the same methodical way she did most things. Departure at first light, travel mug refilled at the County Road gas station, arrival before the morning was spent. She had been making the drive since she was old enough to make it alone, and she knew its landmarks the way Emmett knew his field gauges. Not consciously, but as a baseline against which deviation would register immediately. The timber stand where the property began, the gravel drive climbing toward the western ridge, the farmhouse with the reservoir visible below it to the east, the water surface catching the morning light in the particular way that a full impoundment catches it, flat and certain, the light not scattered but held. Emmett met her at the door with coffee. They sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes in the usual way. Hay yield, stream flows, reservoir level, the cattle operation's spring status. She asked about the eastern inlet valve's last maintenance cycle. He said he had serviced it in February, same as every year, and it was operating correctly. She nodded and wrote nothing. She was not yet in legal mode. She was in the mode of a granddaughter who had grown up on this property and wanted to know that its systems were working before she shifted her attention to the documents that threatened them. Then she set her coffee down and said, "Show me the file." He took her to the second bedroom. The reservoir folder was on the table where he had left it Friday evening. The full contents pulled and arranged in the order she would need them. Water rights decree at the front, water permit behind it, 1984 boundary survey, the 2007 objection letter to the developer with its certified mail receipt, the developer's response, the 2009 objection letter to the HOA with its receipt, the HOA's response, the developer's marketing plan obtained from the county permit office, and Diane's current demand letter at the back. He had not arranged them in that order by accident. He had arranged them in the order a water rights attorney would need to read them, to understand the full sequence from the beginning. Clara sat down and read from the front. She read the water rights decree first. WD-1976-008, issued by the State Water Court in the fall of 1976, vesting in Emmett James Crane the prior appropriation rights to both streams, with a priority date of 1952. She read the decretal language carefully, the way she read all decree language, not for summary, but for the specific operative sentences that defined what the right authorized and what it did not require. The decree authorized diversion of both streams at any time for beneficial use on the Crane property. It said beneficial use on the Crane property, meaning field irrigation, stock water, reservoir storage, any use that benefited the land's agricultural operation. It required no notification to the state. It required no notice to adjacent landowners. It required no administrative filing before diversion. The right to divert was absolute and immediate, and had been absolute and immediate since the day the decree was entered. A decreed prior appropriation right was not a permit requiring renewal or a license requiring reauthorization. It was a property right, recorded in the State Water Rights Registry and in the county deed records, as permanent and as transferable as the deed to the land itself. She read it twice, then she set it aside and read the water permit, WR-1983-114, the impoundment authorization, the storage dimensions, the outlet works description, the eastern inlet valve system noted as an irrigation diversion structure under the authority of Decree WD-1976-008. The permit and the decree cross-referenced each other in the way that properly assembled water rights documentation always did. The decree established the right, the permit authorized the physical structure that exercised it. Together they constituted a complete legal instrument covering everything the reservoir was and everything it could do. She read the 1984 boundary survey next. Emmett had filed it under his own professional surveyor's certification, license number 3892, still active in 1984, lapsed at his retirement. And the survey was precise in the way that a licensed surveyor's filed document is precise. Bearings, distances, monument descriptions, a clear statement that the reservoir's shoreline at maximum fill elevation fell within the Crane parcel boundary at every point, with a minimum setback of 35 feet on the eastern side. Clara traced the boundary description on the survey plat with her finger, identifying the point where the eastern shoreline ran closest to the parcel line. 35 feet. The Marina dock system's landward end sat on the shoreline. The shoreline was inside the deed line by 35 feet. The dock was on Emmett's property. The ramp was on Emmett's property. The pavilion, whose 2011 construction Emmett had noted in the logbook, and which Clara could see from the second bedroom's east-facing window, was on Emmett's property. She read the two objection letters, 2007 to the developer, 2009 to the HOA, and both responses. She read the developer's marketing plan, which she had not seen before, and found the recreational water access corridor language on page 6. Harborview Lake, a premier natural amenity available to all Harborview Estates residents via the dedicated recreational water access corridor along the eastern shoreline. She looked at the sentence for a moment. Dedicated. In property law, dedicated had a specific meaning: formal dedication to public use, accepted by a government authority, recorded in the official record. The marketing plan's use of the word had nothing to do with that meaning. It was marketing language that had appropriated a legal term without understanding what the term required. She read Diane's current demand letter last. Dredging of the eastern shallows, shoreline lighting installation, guaranteed minimum water level for marina operations year-round, all at Emmett's expense. all citing established amenity rights over Harborview Lake. She set the letter down and looked at the window. It was noon. She came back to the kitchen table and called Boyd Whitaker. Boyd had been in agricultural and water property law for 26 years, the first 8 as counsel for the county assessor's office, a background that meant he could read a chain of title and a county permit file simultaneously and understand how they related to each other in the specific way that property disputes required. Clara had worked opposite him in one water rights proceeding and had referred clients to him twice since. She trusted his thoroughness and his timeline. When Boyd said he would have the records in a week, the records were there in a week. She gave him the summary in 8 minutes. He asked 4 questions: the priority date on the water rights decree, the date of the 1984 Boundary Survey's county filing, whether Emmett had received any consideration for the access arrangement that might imply a license, and whether any of the HOA's communications had referenced an easement instrument by a specific recording number. The answers were 1952, April 1984, no consideration of any kind, and no instrument number had ever been cited by anyone. Boyd said he would pull the full development record from the county and state files and call back by the following Thursday. He asked Clara to scan and send the folder contents that afternoon. She said she would. She asked him to pay particular attention to the water rights decree and the inlet valve description in the permit. He said he would. She spent the afternoon at the kitchen table with the flatbed scanner, every document in the folder, both sides, in the order she had read them. Emmett sat at the other end of the table, going through the spring irrigation maintenance schedule, which he reviewed every year in April before the first field application cycle. They worked in the same room without needing to fill the silence. He had watched her work since she was a child, and she had watched him work since before that, and the rhythm of 2 people in a room doing separate things with similar discipline was one they had established over decades. Boyd called the following Thursday at 3:30. Emmett and Clara were on speaker at the kitchen table, the scanned folder open on Clara's laptop for reference. Boyd had spent the week in 3 sets of records: the county recorder's deed and easement index, the county planning department's development permit archive, and the state water rights registry. He reported his findings in 4 parts. The first part confirmed what they already knew. The reservoir was entirely within Emmett's deed boundary, per the 1984 survey. Boyd had pulled the current deed, the chain of title going back to the 1952 acquisition and the 1984 survey filing. Everything was clean and consistent. The eastern shoreline where the Marina infrastructure sat was Emmett's property. The lakebed was Emmett's property. The water surface was Emmett's property in the sense that it sat within his deed boundary and was stored there under his water rights decree and his permit. The second part addressed the access claim. Boyd had searched the county deed and easement index under the Crane parcel address, under the Harborview Estates development address, under the developer's company name, and under the successor entity's name. No easement, no recorded corridor, no instrument of any kind establishing an access right to the reservoir or its shoreline. He had then pulled the developer's 2006 permit application, the one Emmett had reviewed when it was first filed, and read the prior agreement language on page 4. He had searched the state's contract and agreement registry, the county recorder's miscellaneous instruments index, and the state water authority's correspondence files. No agreement existed in any of those records on any date prior to or following the permit application's filing. The citation was false. It had been false on the day it was written, and it had remained false for every year since. The third part was the county planning department's acceptance record for the Marina building permit. Boyd had pulled the permit file, the same permit Emmett had reviewed in 2009, and confirmed that the county had issued it without verifying the applicant's ownership interest in the lakebed. The permit file contained no deed documentation, no easement documentation, and no water rights documentation. It contained the application, the site plan, and the approval stamp. The county had issued a building permit for a structure on private property it had no record of the applicant owning. Then Boyd described what he had found when he read the water rights decree carefully. He said he had read WD-1976-008 in its entirety, including the decretal language governing diversion, and he wanted to make sure Clara had seen the same operative sentences he was looking at. He read the key provision aloud. The decree holder holds the right to divert both streams at any time, in any quantity up to the full adjudicated flow, for beneficial use on the Crane property, without requirement of notice to the state, to adjacent landowners, or to any other party, said right being absolute and senior to all subsequently established water uses in the same drainage. He paused after reading it. He said, "Do you understand what that means for the reservoir level?" Clara said she did. She said she had read the same sentence Saturday morning and had been thinking about it since. Boyd said, "If Emmett closes the eastern inlet valve and diverts the northern stream into the field irrigation system, the reservoir begins dropping. The diversion is the exercise of a decreed property right. It requires no filing, no notification, no administrative process of any kind. It is not a permitted act. It is a decreed right. And the distinction matters because a permit can be suspended or conditioned, while a decreed right cannot be suspended or conditioned by any party other than the water court that issued it." He said he wanted to know the drawdown rate before they went any further, how fast the reservoir dropped under full eastern inlet diversion, and what the level looked like at 48 hours and 72 hours. He said he had a hydrologist in mind, Sylvia Oakes, state certified, 18 years of field experience, her sealed reports accepted in every relevant proceeding Boyd had brought them to. He said he would call her Monday. Emmett had been listening without speaking. He asked one question. Did Boyd need him to estimate the drawdown rate, or would Sylvia do that from field measurements? Boyd said Sylvia would do it from field measurements, but that Emmett's own engineering estimate would be useful as a baseline for her to check against. Emmett said he had done the calculation in February when he serviced the inlet valve. Routine maintenance thinking, the kind of numbers he kept in his head because they described his system's behavior under conditions he might need to manage. He said under dry season conditions with the eastern inlet fully diverted, the reservoir dropped at approximately 0.19 feet per hour, based on the inlet's measured dry season flow rate of 2.1 cubic feet per second and the reservoir's surface area. Over 72 hours, that was approximately 13.7 feet. Call it 14 feet for a conservative estimate. Boyd was quiet for a moment. Then he asked what the Marina dock system's bottom clearance was at full pool. Emmett said the dock was a floating system, with its landward connection fixed to shore pilings. At full pool, the dock floated. At 14-foot drawdown, the water surface dropped below the dock's flotation range, and the dock system would be resting on the lake bed. Boyd said, "And the boat launch ramp?" Emmett said the ramp ran from the shoreline into the water at a standard 15% grade. At 14-foot drawdown, working backward from the ramp's geometry, the waterline would be approximately 56 to 60 feet beyond the ramp's lower end. The ramp would terminate in dry lake bed. Boyd said he would call Sylvia Monday morning. Clara said she would be reachable by phone through the weekend, and asked Boyd to confirm the scope of Sylvia's work when he had spoken to her. Boyd said he would. He said the certified response letter could be drafted in parallel with the hydrological analysis. The letter did not need Sylvia's report to be accurate, since the ownership and access questions were settled by the existing documents. The report was for a different purpose, and Boyd said that purpose was to have the numbers in a sealed professional document before they were needed rather than after. Clara said she understood. After the call, she sat at the kitchen table with her notes and looked at what she had written. The decree language was on the first page, the diversion right, the no-notice requirement, the senior priority. The 14-foot drawdown figure was on the second page, in her own handwriting, with Emmett's calculation methodology written below it. She looked at the number for a moment. Then she looked at her grandfather, who had already returned to his maintenance schedule. She asked, "When did you last run a full drawdown test on the eastern inlet diversion?" He said he had never run one. The diversion gate had been used for partial diversions during dry years, when the western fields needed direct stream application. He had diverted perhaps 40% of the eastern inlet flow on 3 or 4 occasions since 1983. Full diversion had never been necessary because the reservoir's storage had always been adequate for the irrigation demand. Clara said, "So the Marina has been there for 15 years, and you have never exercised your full diversion right?" He said, "Correct." She wrote that in her notes, not as a legal observation, as a fact about a system that had been running at less than its full authorized capacity for 43 years, while another party had been building infrastructure on it and collecting fees from it and calling it by a different name. She drove back to the state capitol Sunday afternoon. Emmett walked her to the car. She said Boyd would have the certified response drafted by the following Friday. He said he would review it when it arrived. She said she would call Thursday evening to go through it with him before he signed. He said that was fine. He stood on the gravel drive and watched her car reach the county road and turn south. Then he went back inside and checked the inlet valve status in his maintenance log. Eastern inlet, open to reservoir, flow nominal. He noted it. He noted the date. He went to bed thinking about the drawdown curve and did not find the thinking troubling. He had built the system to work correctly. He had the decree that authorized it. The numbers were the numbers. When the time came to use them, they would be exactly what they had always been. Sylvia Oakes arrived Monday morning at 7:15. Her field truck parked at the eastern inlet valve housing by the time Emmett walked down from the farmhouse with his thermos. She was compact and direct in her movements, the kind of field professional who sets up equipment before making conversation, and makes conversation only when the equipment is running correctly. She had a flow meter, a survey rod, a depth sounder for the bathymetric work, and a bound field notebook already open on the truck's tailgate. She introduced herself, confirmed the site access arrangement, and asked Emmett one question before they began. Had the eastern inlet valve been operated at any setting other than fully open to the reservoir in the past 12 months? He said no. Full flow to the reservoir, continuous since the previous September's irrigation season close. She wrote that in her field notebook and picked up the flow meter. She worked the eastern inlet stream at 3 stations over the first morning. The uppermost station was 80 feet above the inlet valve housing, in a straight reach of the stream where the channel geometry was consistent and the flow measurement would reflect the stream's full natural discharge without influence from the valve structure. The middle station was 40 feet above the valve, in the transition zone where the stream's velocity began to be affected by the valve's backwater. The lower station was at the valve outlet itself, measuring the flow entering the reservoir under current open valve conditions. She took 3 readings at each station, calculated the average, and recorded the results in her field notebook with the time, the weather conditions, and the water temperature at each station. The eastern inlet's current flow was 2.3 cubic feet per second, slightly above the dry season baseline Emmett had used for his February estimate, which he had calculated at 2.1 cubic feet per second. The difference was consistent with the spring snowmelt contribution still running off the northern ridge, which would taper through May and June until the stream settled into its dry season rate. Sylvia noted both figures, the current measured rate and the projected dry season rate, which she calculated from the stream's recession curve, using the ratio of spring to dry season flow from the 3-station measurements and the channel substrate characteristics. Her projected dry season rate was 1.9 cubic feet per second, slightly below Emmett's 2.1 cubic feet per second estimate, reflecting the more conservative projection that field measurements supported. She moved to the reservoir in the afternoon. The bathymetric survey of the eastern shallows was the most time-consuming part of the field work. She worked the depth sounder in systematic transects across the eastern third of the reservoir, from the Marina dock system's seaward end back toward the inlet valve, recording depth at 30-foot intervals on each transect. The eastern shallows were shallower than the reservoir's design average. The natural basin's topography sloped gradually from the eastern shoreline before dropping more sharply toward the deeper central basin, and the marina had been positioned in the shallower zone, a placement that made sense from a dock installation perspective, since shallow water required shorter pilings, and that was now the relevant factor in the drawdown analysis, since a shallower zone loses usable water depth faster under drawdown conditions than the deeper basin. She measured the dock system's current operational geometry on her second day, the height of the dock surface above the current water surface, the depth of water at the dock's seaward end, the grade of the boat launch ramp from the shoreline to its lower end, and the current distance from the ramp's lower end to the water's edge. The dock was floating at its designed operational depth. The ramp's lower end was submerged by approximately 3 feet. The water's edge was at the ramp's designed operational termination point. The system was working as its installer had intended, under current full pool conditions. She came back Wednesday morning for one additional set of measurements, inlet flow rate confirmation, and a final set of bathymetric transects in the shallowest section of the eastern shallows. the zone immediately in front of the Marina dock system's landward connection to the shore pilings. This was the zone where the lake bed would be exposed first under drawdown conditions, and she wanted the depth measurements there to be as precise as the rest of the report. She finished at noon, packed her equipment, and told Emmett she would have a draft report to Boyd by the following Wednesday and a sealed final by Friday. Boyd received the draft Wednesday afternoon and called Sylvia that evening with 3 questions about her drawdown curve methodology, specifically the assumptions underlying her dry season flow projection and the way she had handled the reservoir's evaporation rate in the volume balance calculation. Sylvia answered all 3 without hesitation, citing her field measurements and the standard evaporation coefficients for the region's climate classification. Boyd said the methodology was sound. She said she would send the sealed final Friday morning. The sealed report arrived at Boyd's office Friday at 9. 19 pages, Sylvia's state hydrologist certification number and professional seal on the cover page, her signature on the last page. Boyd read it in full before he called anyone. The report's key findings were organized in 4 sections. Section 1 described the eastern inlet stream's current and projected dry season flow rates: 2.3 cubic feet per second current, 1.9 cubic feet per second projected dry season, and confirmed that under full diversion to the western field irrigation system, 0 flow would enter the reservoir from the eastern inlet. Section 2 described the reservoir's current volumetric condition and the bathymetry of the eastern shallows in detail sufficient to support the drawdown projection. Section 3 was the drawdown analysis. Under full eastern inlet diversion during dry season conditions, with the reservoir at or near its current full pool elevation, the water surface would drop at an average rate of 0.185 feet per hour for the first 48 hours, decelerating slightly as the surface area decreased in the deeper central basin, for a projected 72-hour drawdown of 13.8 feet, which Sylvia rounded to 14 feet in her summary, consistent with Emmett's February estimate and confirming it with measured data rather than approximation. Section 4 was the operational impact analysis. At 14-foot drawdown, the Marina dock system's flotation would bottom out on the lake bed at approximately the 11-foot drawdown mark, meaning the dock would be sitting on exposed mud for the final 3 feet of the 14-foot drawdown, and would remain on exposed mud thereafter until the reservoir refilled. The boat launch ramp's lower end, currently submerged by 3 feet, would be clear of the water surface at approximately the 3-foot drawdown mark, and would be 58 feet from the receding water line at full 14-foot drawdown. The waterfront pavilion's deck, currently overlooking open water at close range, would overlook a gray silt flat extending 60 to 80 feet to the receding water's edge at full drawdown. Sylvia had included a figure in Section 4, a cross-section drawing of the eastern shore at full pool and at 14-foot drawdown, showing both conditions on the same diagram. The marina infrastructure appeared in both conditions. At full pool, it floated and functioned. At 14-foot drawdown, it sat on a silt flat, with open water visible in the distance. The drawing did not require explanatory text. It was a precise, engineering illustration of a physical reality, and it said what it said without editorial comment. Boyd called Clara Friday afternoon. He read the key figures from the report: dry season flow rate, drawdown rate, 72-hour projection, operational impact at full drawdown, and confirmed that all of them were consistent with Emmett's February engineering estimate. Clara said she had expected that. She said the certified response letter needed to go out the same week. Boyd said the draft was ready, and he would send it to her and Emmett for review by end of day. The draft arrived at Emmett's email at 4:30 Friday. He printed it at the kitchen table and read it with the same deliberate attention he brought to every document that bore his name, beginning to end, once for comprehension, once for accuracy. 4 paragraphs, plain language. The first paragraph stated the ownership position in 3 recorded instruments. Crane Reservoir was Emmett's private property under his deed. Under State Water Permit WR-1983-114, and under Water Rights Decree WD-1976-008. All 3 instruments were recorded: the deed in the County Recorder's Office, the water permit in the State Water Authority's Permit Registry, and the Water Rights Decree in both the State Water Rights Registry and the County Deed Records. The paragraph named all 3 instruments by their specific identifying numbers, and noted that all three were available for public review in the relevant official records. The second paragraph refused the demand in full: the dredging, the lighting installation, the minimum water level maintenance requirement. Each demand was refused on the same basis. The demands required Emmett to alter the management and physical condition of his private property for the HOA's benefit, on the basis of an authority the HOA did not possess over property it did not own. The paragraph was 2 sentences. It said no, and it said why. The third paragraph addressed the marina infrastructure directly. The dock system, the boat launch ramp, and the waterfront pavilion had been installed on Emmett's private lakebed and shoreline without a recorded easement, without his consent, and without compensation. Emmett reserved all rights with respect to the continued presence of those structures on his property. The paragraph did not specify what those rights included or how they might be exercised. It said reserved. Boyd had chosen that word carefully. The fourth paragraph was a single sentence. No further demands would be considered without presentation of a recorded instrument establishing the HOA's claimed access and amenity rights over Crane Reservoir. 4 attachments: the water permit, the water rights decree, the 1984 boundary survey, and Boyd's 2-page county records summary, his name and firm address at the top, the search date and methodology described in the first paragraph, and the findings stated plainly in the second. No easement, no recorded corridor, no instrument of any kind establishing an HOA access right to Crane Reservoir exists in the county deed and easement index, the county planning permit records, the state water rights registry, or the state water authority's permit files as of the date of this summary. Clara called Emmett at 6 to go through the draft. She asked if he had questions on any of the 4 paragraphs. He said the third paragraph's reserved language was correct, and that he understood what it meant in context. She said Boyd had been deliberate about it. It left every option open without disclosing which options were under consideration. Emmett said he understood. He said the letter was accurate and he would sign it. He printed the final version Saturday morning, signed it at the kitchen table, scanned it back to Boyd's office, and drove to the County Road post office at 7:30. He mailed it certified, kept the receipt, and drove back to the property. He opened his logbook at the kitchen table and wrote the Saturday date. He wrote, "Certified response mailed 7:31 a.m. 4 attachments. Demand refused in full. Unauthorized structures noted. Rights reserved. No recorded instrument cited by HOA. County record. Unchanged." He paused. Then he added one line at the bottom of the entry, below the summary, in the same even hand he used for every logbook entry from the first one in 1980 to this one. Inlet valve. Operational. He closed the logbook and looked east through the kitchen window. The reservoir was at full pool in the morning light, the water surface flat and certain, the dock system floating at the eastern shore as it had floated for 15 years. The pavilion stood on his shoreline in the early sun. The ramp ran down to the water's edge at its designed grade. Sylvia's report was in Boyd's file. The drawdown curve was on page 11. The cross-section drawing was on page 14. He had sent the letter. He had attached the instruments. Now it was Diane Hollis's decision. He made breakfast and waited to find out what kind of decision she would make. Diane received the certified envelope Monday afternoon, signed the receipt without looking at the return address, and carried it to her home office, the room that faced east toward the reservoir, the water visible through the window in the afternoon light, the dock system floating at its usual position, the pavilion roof catching the sun at the angle that looked best in photographs, the angle she had used for the HOA newsletter cover 3 years running. She opened the envelope at her desk and removed the letter and the 4 attachments. She read the first paragraph. 3 recorded instruments: a deed, a water permit, a water rights decree. Numbers beside each one: WR-1983-114, WD-1976-008. The kind of numbers that meant something specific in a government registry, and nothing at all to someone who had never looked up a water rights instrument in her life. She read the first paragraph twice, set the letter down, and looked at the attachments without opening them. Then she picked up her phone. The HOA's general counsel was a local firm that handled the standard association matters: enforcement, collections, contractor disputes, the routine legal maintenance of a 210-unit development's administrative life. The attorney who answered her call listened to her summary for 5 minutes and told her the water permit and water rights decree questions were outside his firm's practice area. He said she needed a water law specialist and gave her 2 names. She thanked him and wrote both names on the notepad beside her phone. She called the first name on the list Monday afternoon, a water law attorney 2 counties over, whose practice focused on agricultural and irrigation water disputes. His paralegal said he was in a hearing but would review the file and call back by Wednesday. Diane sent the letter and the 4 attachments by email that evening. She did not send Sylvia Oakes's hydraulic report because she did not know it existed. She did not send Emmett's 2007 and 2009 objection letters because she did not know Boyd had them. She knew the HOA had received a letter in 2009 because it was referenced in the board's founding records, but she had not pulled it from the files and she had not sent it. The attorney called back Wednesday at 2 in the afternoon. He had spent 2 days reviewing the 4 documents Diane had sent and had pulled the relevant county and state records independently, the same records Boyd had pulled, the same index searches, the same finding. He reported his assessment in 4 parts, and his tone was the measured, neutral delivery of someone who has spent a career telling clients things they do not want to hear. The marketing plan's recreational water access corridor description was not a recorded easement. It was marketing language. It did not create a property right in any jurisdiction he was aware of, under any legal theory that had survived appellate review. The developer's permit application citation of a prior agreement with the adjacent landowner was unsupported by any document in any record he had searched: County Deed Index, County Planning Archive, State Water Rights Registry, State Water Authority permit files. No agreement existed. The citation was false on its face. The HOA had no defensible legal position on the property access question. He said this plainly, without softening it, because he considered it more harmful to give a client a qualified version of bad news than the unqualified version. The reservoir was Emmett Crane's property under 3 independent recorded instruments. The HOA's Marina infrastructure was on that property without legal authorization. The demand letter's citation of established amenity rights had no foundation in any recorded instrument. He recommended immediate settlement outreach. He said the HOA's exposure was significant. 15 years of unauthorized structures on private property. 15 years of amenity fees collected from water access they did not legally possess. And that the exposure grew with every week of continued operation. He said the goal of settlement should be a negotiated access arrangement, ideally a recorded easement with compensation terms, reached before the property owner filed a formal complaint. Diane asked about prescriptive easement. She had looked it up Tuesday evening. The theory that long-term open and continuous use could create a legal right equivalent to a recorded easement, without the property owner's consent, if the use met the statutory requirements for the relevant period. The attorney paused before answering. He said prescriptive easement required open and hostile use, inconsistent with the owner's permission, continuous for the statutory period, without the owner's consent and over the owner's objection. He said he needed to ask one question before he could evaluate the theory's applicability. Had the property owner ever objected in writing to the HOA's use of the reservoir? Diane said he had sent a letter in 2009. She said the board had responded, citing the marketing plan and the access corridor. The attorney said, was the 2009 letter a formal objection, stating that the reservoir was private property and that no access right had been granted? Diane said she believed it was, but she had not read it recently. The attorney said he would need to see that letter before he could advise on prescriptive easement theory. He said if the 2009 letter was a written objection establishing owner opposition to the use, it would defeat the prescriptive easement claim on its face. A prescriptive easement cannot ripen over a period during which the owner has been actively objecting, and a written objection letter was the clearest possible form of owner opposition. He said if there was a 2007 letter as well, Diane mentioned Emmett had written to the developer, the objection record would be even stronger, and the prescriptive easement theory would be unsalvageable. Diane said she would find the letters and send them. She pulled the HOA's founding records file Thursday morning and located the 2009 board correspondence folder. The letter was there, Emmett's original certified letter, 3 paragraphs, the certified mail receipt still attached. She read it for the first time. Private property. No access right granted. No easement exists. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put it back in the folder without scanning it and did not send it to the attorney. She called an emergency board meeting Thursday evening instead. The meeting was in the development's common room, the same carpeted, fluorescent-lit space that served for all board business. Diane, Marcus, and Carol arrived within 5 minutes of each other. Diane had printed one document for the table, the HOA's current amenity fee revenue summary, showing 15 years of collection at $175 per unit per year across 210 units. She had not printed the attorney's assessment. She had not printed Emmett's certified response letter. She had not printed the 2009 objection letter she had found that morning. She presented her position in 10 minutes. 15 years of marina operations, the dock, the launch ramp, the pavilion, had been running without interruption and had defined the development's character and its property value since 2009. The 60 lakefront units had been purchased at a premium based on water access. The aggregate amenity fee revenue over 15 years was $551,250. Retreat, acknowledging the access question and initiating removal of the marina infrastructure, would trigger refund liability from lakefront unit owners, property value claims from the 60 households whose purchase price had included lake access, and the loss of $36,750 in annual amenity fee revenue from the HOA's operating budget. She said retreat was not a viable option. She said the board's only viable path was to assert its rights formally and allow the legal process to determine the outcome. She described prescriptive easement in 2 sentences. 15 years of open, continuous, community-wide use of the reservoir established a legal right equivalent to a recorded easement, and that right could be asserted in a formal letter and defended in court if necessary. She did not tell the board that the attorney she had retained had recommended against asserting it. She did not tell them about the 2009 objection letter she had read that morning. She said the board would vote on sending a second letter asserting prescriptive easement rights and demanding compliance within 30 days. Carol voted yes. She had not asked any questions during Diane's presentation. She had been on the board for 4 months and had not reviewed the underlying property documents. Marcus voted no. He said it clearly and without elaboration when the vote was called. Then he asked for the meeting minutes and the minute-taker's laptop. He dictated his dissent statement himself, looking at the screen while he spoke. He said he had voted no because before signing the first demand letter, he had emailed Diane asking for a recorded easement instrument establishing the HOA's access right to the reservoir, and he had received a response citing the developer's marketing plan rather than a recorded instrument, and he had sent a follow-up email asking specifically whether a recorded easement existed, and that email had not been answered. He said he was recording his dissent because the board was now voting to assert prescriptive easement rights, a legal theory that required open use over the owner's objection, without having reviewed whether the owner had objected in writing at any point during the 15-year period of claimed use. He said he had looked at the county deed index himself and had found no recorded easement. He said if an owner objection letter existed in the HOA's own files, the board should have read it before voting to assert a theory that an objection letter would defeat. He asked the minute-taker to read it back. She read it back. He confirmed it was accurate. He asked that it be time-stamped. She added the time. He photographed the screen with his phone before the meeting closed. Then he asked Diane directly, "Is there an objection letter from the property owner in the HOA's files?" Diane said the 2009 correspondence was in the founding records file. Marcus asked if she had read it before the meeting. Diane said she had reviewed it this morning. Marcus wrote the date on his copy of the meeting agenda and underlined the exchange. He put it in his bag. The second letter went out Friday on HOA letterhead, the water law attorney's firm name in the footer as outside counsel, though the attorney had not drafted it and had not been told it was being sent. Diane had drafted it herself using the prescriptive easement framework she had described at the meeting. 2 pages. The first page asserted 15 years of open, continuous, community-wide use of Harborview Lake as the basis for a prescriptive easement claim equivalent to a recorded access right. The second page demanded that Emmett cease any interference with lake access, comply with the dredging, lighting, and minimum water level demands, and respond in writing within 30 days or face legal action to establish the prescriptive easement in court. The letter did not mention Emmett's 2007 or 2009 objection letters. It did not address the water permit or the water rights decree. It asserted the prescriptive easement theory and stated the 30-day deadline and left everything else, every document that answered the theory, every instrument that made it untenable, unaddressed. Emmett received it Saturday morning. He drove to the mailbox at the end of the gravel drive, signed the certified receipt, and stood at the mailbox to read it. He read both pages. Prescriptive easement, 15 years of open and continuous use, 30-day compliance demand. He read the prescriptive easement language with the attention of someone who knew that the theory required use over the owner's objection, and he thought about the 2007 letter and the 2009 letter, both certified, both in the county's correspondence record, both stating plainly that the reservoir was private property and that no access right had been granted. The prescriptive easement theory required that those letters not exist. They existed. He had copies in the filing cabinet in the second bedroom. He folded the letter in half and drove back to the farmhouse. He sat at the kitchen table and called Clara. She answered immediately. He said, "Second letter, prescriptive easement theory, 30-day compliance demand." Clara said, "Now we file." He said, "I know." She said she would call Boyd Monday morning and that the complaint would be drafted by the end of the week. She said he should do nothing in the meantime. No response to the letter, no communication with the HOA. He said he understood. She said she would drive up Tuesday after the filing was confirmed. After they hung up, he sat at the kitchen table for a moment with the letter in front of him and thought about the prescriptive easement theory's requirement. Open and continuous use, without the owner's consent, over the owner's objection. He had objected. He had objected in 2007 and again in 2009, and both times in writing, both times by certified mail, both times in language that stated the legal position plainly enough that no one reading it could have missed what it said. The HOA's letter asserted 15 years of use over his objection as the basis for a legal right. The theory was not just incorrect, it was precisely and documentably incorrect, defeated by the same filing cabinet in the same second bedroom that had been holding the correct answer since the letters were written. He opened his logbook to a new page. He wrote the Saturday date at the top. He wrote, "Second letter received. Prescriptive easement theory asserted. Demand refused. 2 certified objection letters on record, 2007, 2009. Theory unsupportable on documented record." He paused. He looked at what he had written. Then he added one line below the entry, in the same measured hand. "Inlet diversion. Pending." He closed the logbook and looked east through the window at the reservoir. Full pool. The water surface flat in the Saturday morning light, the dock system floating at the eastern shore, exactly as it had floated for 15 years. He thought about 14 feet, then he made breakfast. Boyd filed at 9:05 Monday morning. 41 pages, 3 tracks, 9 exhibits, the complaint organized with the structural precision of a man who had spent 26 years building property rights cases from the ground up, and who understood that the quality of a complaint was measured not by its length but by the completeness of its evidentiary foundation. Every assertion in the text had a corresponding exhibit. Every exhibit was a document that had been sitting in a county or state file for years, available to anyone who had looked. No one on the HOA's side had looked at the right documents in the right sequence. Boyd had. The complaint was the result. Track 1 occupied the first 15 pages. 15 years of unauthorized structures on Emmett's private lakebed and shoreline. The Marina dock system installed in 2009. The boat launch ramp installed the same year. The waterfront pavilion installed in 2011. Without a recorded easement, without a deed conveyance, without a license, without compensation, without consent. Boyd constructed the track in 2 layers. The first layer established ownership. The deed, the 1984 boundary survey, and the water rights decree together confirmed that the reservoir, its lakebed, and its eastern shoreline fell within the Crane property boundary under 3 independent recorded instruments. The second layer documented the unauthorized use, the Marina building permit showing the installation address as HOA common area without any deed documentation, the pavilion building permit showing the same deficiency, and the HOA's own amenity fee records, obtained from the county's HOA registration filings, which required annual financial disclosures, showing $175 per unit per year across 210 units beginning in 2010. 15 years, $551,250 in aggregate. Generated from access to water Emmett owned, collected without his knowledge of the fee structure until Boyd pulled the financial disclosures, without compensation, without a single recorded instrument authorizing the arrangement. Track 2 ran from page 16 to page 28. The two demand letters, the spring letter and the second letter from the previous week, constituted unlawful interference with adjudicated water rights and private property. Boyd was precise about the water rights dimension of this track. The demands did not merely ask Emmett to do things on his property. They asked him to manage a state-permitted water storage facility in ways dictated by the HOA's operational preferences, and they asked him to maintain water levels for the HOA's Marina's benefit, which was, in effect, asking him to hold his adjudicated water in storage for someone else's use, rather than diverting it for his own beneficial use, as the decree authorized. The demands were not just a property overreach. They were an attempted constraint on a decreed water right, which was a category of interference that water law treated with particular seriousness. Boyd named Diane personally on track 2 because both letters bore her signature, and the pattern of interference, demand, refusal, escalated demand, was documented in the certified mail record. Track 3 was 11 pages, and it was the section Boyd had written with the most care, because the prescriptive easement theory in the second letter was not merely legally incorrect. It was specifically and documentably incorrect, in a way that the record made plain without requiring argument. Prescriptive easement required open and hostile use, inconsistent with the owner's permission, continuous for the statutory period, without the owner's consent, and over the owner's objection. Exhibit E was Emmett's 2007 letter to the developer, certified, 3 paragraphs, stating that the reservoir was private property, and that no access right had been granted or agreed to. Exhibit F was Emmett's 2009 letter to the HOA, certified, 3 paragraphs, stating that the dock had been installed on his private lakebed without consent, and that no access right existed. The objection record began in 2007, 2 years before the marina was installed, and had been formally restated in 2009, the month the dock went in. The prescriptive easement theory required 15 years of uncontested use. The objection letters established contested use from the first year. The theory failed at its foundation, and it failed on documents the HOA had in its own files. Exhibit 1 was the last exhibit in the stack, and Boyd had positioned it there deliberately, not as an afterthought, but as the document the entire complaint pointed toward. Water Rights Decree WD-1976-008, issued by the State Water Court, October 1976. Boyd had pulled the certified copy from the State Water Rights Registry and had it reproduced in the exhibit at full size, the decretal language visible without magnification. The operative sentence was on page 2 of the decree. The decree holder holds the right to divert both streams at any time, in any quantity up to the full adjudicated flow, for beneficial use on the Crane property, without requirement of notice to the state, to adjacent landowners, or to any other party. Said right being absolute and senior to all subsequently established water uses in the same drainage. Boyd had not highlighted the sentence. He had not placed a footnote beside it. He had included the full decree as an exhibit and let the language read for itself. Anyone with legal training who read Exhibit 1 would understand immediately what it meant in the context of a complaint about a marina built on a reservoir's eastern shore. Anyone without legal training would ask someone with legal training and receive the same answer within minutes. Certified copies went to all 3 named parties before 11 a.m. Diane Hollis at the HOA board address, the HOA's registered agent, and the developer's successor entity at their registered business address. All 3 signed for before noon. Emmett had been at the eastern inlet valve since 9:15. He had driven down from the farmhouse in the truck, parked at the valve housing, and walked the inlet stream from the valve to the upper measurement station Sylvia had used, a habit from his engineering years, checking the system before operating it. The stream was running at 2.1 cubic feet per second by his field estimate, close to the dry season baseline, the spring snowmelt contribution fully tapered in the 3 weeks since Sylvia's measurements. He walked back to the valve housing, opened the access panel, and checked the valve mechanism. the same check he performed at every February maintenance cycle, now performed again before an operation he had never needed to execute at full diversion in 43 years of the valve's existence. The mechanism was in perfect working order. He had serviced it in February. He had built it in 1983 and had designed it to last, and it had lasted. And it would continue to last because he maintained it correctly and had always maintained it correctly. At 9:20, he turned the valve to its fully diverted position. Eastern inlet redirected to the western field irrigation system, zero flow to the reservoir. He watched the stream below the valve for 30 seconds to confirm the diversion was complete, saw the flow reduce to the trickle of residual drainage below the valve seat, and confirmed it in his field notebook. Then he opened his logbook to the current page and wrote, "Eastern inlet diverted to field system, 9:20 a.m. Monday. No notification required. Decreed right WD-1976-008. He drove back to the farmhouse. He had not called Ray Cobb. He had not filed a form with the State Water Authority. He had not notified the HOA or any resident of the development. The decree said no notification was required, and the decree was the authority, and Emmett had spent his career respecting what documents said when they were the governing instrument. Boyd had called Ray Cobb Monday morning before the filing, as a professional courtesy, not a notification required by law, but the kind of communication between professionals who had worked in the same regulatory space for decades, and who understood that a field inspector arriving at a site without context was less useful than one who knew what he was looking at. Boyd had told Ray that Emmett was exercising his decreed diversion rights beginning Monday morning, that the reservoir level would drop over the following 72 hours, and that Sylvia Oakes's report documenting the expected drawdown was available if Ray wanted to review it before going to the site. Ray had said he would drive out Thursday afternoon to have the documentation in hand if any complaints were routed to his office. Clara drove up Tuesday. She arrived at noon, made coffee, and spent the afternoon at the kitchen table reading Boyd's complaint, the full 41 pages, each track, each exhibit, in the order Boyd had organized them. She made notes on a legal pad, not because she found errors, but because reading a complaint she had helped build was a way of confirming that the record it described was the same record she carried in her head. It was. She set the legal pad aside at 4 and told Emmett the complaint was solid. He said he knew. She asked if he wanted to walk the ridge. He said yes. They climbed the western ridge path at 5 in the afternoon, the same path Emmett had walked for 50 years, and came out on the flat section near the crest, where the reservoir was visible below them to the east. The water surface was at full pool. The drawdown had been running for 32 hours. At 0.185 feet per hour, the level had dropped approximately 6 feet since Monday morning. At the reservoir's surface area, a 6-foot drop in the central basin was not dramatically visible from the ridge. The eastern shallows were a different matter. Emmett looked at the Marina dock system and could see, even from this distance, that the landward end of the dock was sitting lower relative to the shore pilings than it should have been at full pool. Not on the mud yet. Close. Clara looked at the same section of shoreline. She asked, "How many feet?" He said, 6 down, 8 to go. She looked at the pavilion, the timber frame and concrete deck, the eastern-facing waterside view that had appeared on the HOA newsletter cover 3 years running. The view from the pavilion deck was still open water, still appeared functional from the ridge. By Thursday morning, it would not be. They stood on the ridge for a while without speaking. The evening light was coming off the ridge at a low angle, the reservoir surface catching it the way a full impoundment caught it, flat and certain. It would not look like that from the pavilion deck on Thursday morning. On Thursday morning, it would look like what Sylvia had drawn on page 14 of her report, a gray silt flat extending 60 to 80 feet to a receding waterline. They walked back down at dusk. Emmett checked the irrigation system's flow at the field distribution headers on the way. The eastern inlet diversion was feeding the western fields at full flow, exactly as designed. The lateral distribution lines running at operating pressure, the risers delivering water to the hay ground that had been waiting since the previous season's close. The system was working correctly. It had always been designed to do exactly this. Thursday arrived with the clarity of a dry season morning. Low humidity, hard light, the eastern shallows of the reservoir catching the sunrise at an angle that showed their recession unmistakably from the ridge. Emmett had checked the drawdown calculation Wednesday evening. 72 hours from 9:20 Monday would be 9:20 Thursday morning. Sylvia's projected 14-foot drawdown at 72 hours, at the 0.185 feet per hour average rate, put the level at approximately 12.9 feet of drawdown by Thursday morning, close to the projected full figure, with the rate decelerating slightly as the surface area decreased in the deeper central basin. The first Marina users arrived at 7:30, 2 households with boats on trailers, a morning launch routine they had been running since 2009. They backed their trailers down the boat launch ramp and found the ramp ending in gray silt 12 feet before the waterline. They walked to the dock. The landward slips, the first 8 of the 40-slip system, were sitting on exposed lakebed, the dock surface tilted slightly landward as the flotation had settled onto the mud. The waterline was 30 feet from the dock's seaward end and receding. By 10 a.m., the launch ramp was ending in open air 58 feet from the waterline, exactly as Sylvia's report had projected. The number was not approximate. It was the number on page 14 of a sealed professional report, confirmed by field measurement, and the field was now demonstrating it with the indifferent precision of physical reality, performing according to a calculation. By noon, the pavilion's waterside deck overlooked a gray silt flat extending 63 feet to the receding waterline. The view that had appeared on 3 consecutive HOA newsletter covers, open water at close range, the morning light on the surface, the timber frame of the pavilion reflected in the water, was gone. In its place was what the reservoir looked like when the water that had always been Emmett's was being used for what it had always been built to do. A resident named Patricia photographed the mudflat from the pavilion deck at 12:15 and posted to the neighborhood forum with 3 words and a question mark. Where is the water? The thread had 40 replies within the first 20 minutes, most of them variants of the same question in different registers. Alarm, confusion, a few attempting practical explanations involving drought or equipment failure. By 2 p.m., there were 140 replies. By 3, there were 190, the thread having expanded to include speculation about the cause, calls for the board to explain, and one lengthy post from a resident who had looked up the county tax records and noted that the reservoir was assessed under a separate parcel number from the development, suggesting, he said, that it might be someone else's property. Marcus posted at 4 p.m. He did not post a photograph or a speculation or a question. He posted the County Deed Index search result for the Crane parcel address, a direct link to the county recorder's public database, showing the search results for easements recorded against that parcel. The results were a blank table, no easements, no recorded corridor, no instrument. He wrote one sentence below the link. There is no recorded easement for this reservoir in the county record. The thread had 280 replies by 5 p.m. Ray Cobb had driven out Thursday afternoon, parked his State Water Authority truck on the county road shoulder at 2:30, and walked to the valve housing with Boyd's courtesy call notes and a copy of Decree WD-1976-008 in his field folder. He confirmed the valve position, fully diverted, consistent with what Boyd had described, and noted the reservoir level from the shoreline gauge Emmett had mounted on the northern bank. 12.8 feet of drawdown. He wrote the reading in his field notebook, confirmed the decree's authorization language, and drove to a position on the county road where he could see the corridor between the valve housing and the development's eastern boundary. The State Water Authority call came in at 3:30 from a resident who had found the authority's complaint line through the county's emergency services directory. The call was routed to Ray's field unit because the complaint involved a water management structure within his inspection territory. He answered and listened to the complaint. Reservoir draining, no explanation, Marina inoperable, and confirmed that he was already on site, that the drawdown was the result of an authorized diversion under Water Rights Decree WD-1976-008, that the decree authorized diversion at any time without notification, and that there was no applicable regulatory action available because no regulation had been violated. He said the decree was a matter of public record and could be reviewed at the State Water Rights Registry. He gave the registry's website address. The resident said he did not understand why a private person could drain a lake. Ray said it was not a lake in the public sense. He said it was a private reservoir, and the water in it was private property under a decreed water right that predated the development by 7 years. He said there was nothing further the water authority could do. He filed his field notation at 4 p.m. from the county road shoulder. Authorized diversion confirmed. Decree WD-1976-008 in effect. Drawdown within projected parameters per Aldis report. No permit violation. No applicable regulatory action. The emergency board session convened at 5 p.m. Friday. The development's common room, the same 6 chairs and whiteboard. Diane arrived first, her phone in both hands. Carol arrived second. Marcus arrived last, at 4:59, carrying a manila folder. He sat down, opened the folder, and placed 2 documents on the table in front of his chair. The first was Emmett's 2009 objection letter, retrieved from the HOA's founding records file that morning. The same letter Diane had read the previous Thursday, and had not sent to the attorney, and had not brought to the board meeting. The certified mail receipt was still attached to the upper corner. 3 paragraphs. Private property. No access right granted. No easement exists. The second document was his own email to Diane, printed on a single page. The Monday evening message asking for the recorded easement instrument, the sent timestamp visible at the top, and below it, blank space where a reply would have appeared. And then his follow-up email asking specifically whether a recorded easement existed, with its own timestamp, and below that, nothing. No reply. The absence of a reply was as visible on the printed page as the presence of one would have been. He set both documents on the table, side by side, and folded his hands and looked at Diane. He did not say anything. Outside, the reservoir was 11 feet below full pool, and dropping at 0.185 feet per hour. The Marina dock system was on the mud. The boat launch ramp ended in open air. The pavilion deck overlooked a silt flat. The forum thread had 310 replies, and the 2 documents on the common room table said, in the plain language of a certified letter and an unanswered email, everything that needed to be said about how the situation had arrived at this point. Diane opened her folder and began to speak. Diane resigned Sunday morning by email. 2 sentences. Stepping down effective immediately. She wished the community well. She sent it at 8:43 and closed her laptop. Marcus read it at 9:15, forwarded it to Boyd's office. Assuming interim presidency at noon, available at 1 p.m. Boyd replied in 8 minutes. Confirmed. He called at 1 exactly. Boyd let him speak first. Marcus said no contest on all 3 tracks, full settlement. He said, "What does Emmett need?" Boyd presented 5 terms. 1. Removal of the Marina dock system, boat launch ramp, and waterfront pavilion from Emmett's property within 90 days, at the HOA's expense, with full site restoration to pre-installation condition, lakebed and shoreline returned to the grade and substrate that existed before the first piling was driven in 2009. 2. A recorded acknowledgement, permanent in the county deed records, that Crane Reservoir, its lakebed, and its eastern shoreline were Emmett's private property, and that no HOA access right, amenity right, or use right of any kind had ever existed. Not a settlement letter in a firm's file, a recorded instrument, attached to the property record, visible in every future title search. The marketing plan had called it Harborview Lake for 15 years. The recorded instrument would call it Crane Reservoir and say who owned it. 3. The developer's successor entity to pay retroactive use compensation, negotiated from the $551,250 aggregate amenity fee total, adjusted for successor liability exposure, or Emmett would maintain the developer claim in the complaint and ask the court to make a formal finding on the 2007 permit application's false prior agreement citation. 4. A permanent recorded instrument confirming Emmett's full authority under water permit WR-1983-114 and water rights decree WD-1976-008 with the HOA's express acknowledgement that inlet diversion and reservoir level management were Emmett's decreed rights, not subject to HOA objection or legal challenge. Boyd said this term was non-negotiable. 5. Formal recorded withdrawal of the prescriptive easement claim, with a finding that Emmett's 2007 and 2009 certified objection letters established continuous owner objection sufficient to defeat the theory for the full 15-year period. The claim had been put in writing on HOA letterhead. Its defeat would be in writing in the permanent record. Marcus confirmed all 5 terms and said he would have the developer compensation figure confirmed by end of week. Sylvia Oakes attended the settlement review Wednesday and recommended a 6th term before she signed off on the restoration language. An Eastern Shoreline Restoration Clause requiring the HOA to restore the marina footprint to pre-2009 natural shoreline condition within 18 months, funded by the HOA, supervised by a licensed hydrologist, completion verified by a sealed field report. Boyd added it. Emmett said yes without discussion. Ray Cobb called Thursday morning before the signing. The developer's 2007 permit application, with its false prior agreement citation, accepted by the county without verification, was still sitting in the planning archive as a clean record. It needed an administrative notation flagging the false statement, reference to the settlement terms and Boyd's county records summary. Marcus said he would file the correction himself, in his own name, before the end of the week. He knew the form. He had been asking the right questions since before the first letter went out. Emmett signed Thursday afternoon. 6 instruments, each one read completely before the signature line was reached. He signed the last page at 3:44. He drove back to the property. He did not go inside. He drove to the eastern inlet valve housing, parked, and walked to the mechanism. Friday morning at 6:14, he opened the valve, turned it from its diverted position back to the reservoir, felt the gate release, heard the stream's sound shift above him as the full flow redirected from the field lateral back to the inlet pipe. He walked to the reservoir end and watched the water arrive at the surface. Steady, purposeful, the same flow that had been filling this basin every wet season since 1983. He stood at the valve housing for a while. He did not hurry. He had watched this inlet fill this reservoir for 43 years, and it looked the same now as it had on the first day. Water moving from a ridge stream through a pipe into a basin because the structure was built correctly and had been maintained correctly, and the decree said it was his to use. He walked back to the farmhouse and opened his logbook. Eastern Inlet restored, 6:14 a.m., reservoir filling, matter closed. Clara called that evening. She asked how he felt. He thought about it. He said, "Same as I feel when the hayfields get water." She asked, "And how is that?" He said, "Like the system is working the way it was designed to work." She said she would drive up in 2 weeks. He said the guest room was ready. He booked Ray Cobb's office for the annual permit renewal inspection before he went to bed. First week of November, same as every year. Logbook open on the kitchen table. Outside, the eastern inlet ran in the dark, filling the reservoir at its steady rate. The same water, the same land, the same decree, working exactly as designed.